I was sitting at my desk, looking through my portfolios like any other Tuesday morning, the spreadsheets, charts, and risk and return summaries flashing before my eyes, one after another, like the pieces of a complex but familiar puzzle that I, Harper T., had been assembling for years, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, blinking dimly in the corner of my desk, as if hesitantly asking whether it was worth intruding on my regimented world. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. Without thinking, spam calls had become unbearably annoying lately, and I had learned to ignore them without a moment's hesitation. But this time, for some reason, I reached for the phone. Maybe it was intuition, as quiet but persistent as a thin draft under the door, or maybe it was just chance, but in any case, this call was the very moment after which everything I had built with such care and stubborn faith began to shake like a house of cards. "Hello," I said, not taking my eyes off the screen with numbers and graphs. The office was quiet, as always at this hour. Only the steady, barely audible hum of the air conditioner and the barely audible sound of pressing keys coming from somewhere outside created a sense of measured calm, as if the world outside the walls of my office lived according to a predictable, reliable schedule. "Harper T." The voice on the other end of the line sounded hoarse, hesitant, but at the same time familiar to the point of goosebumps, to an unpleasant cramp in the stomach, and I instantly froze, as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water on me. "This is your mother," it sounded, and my fingers stopped over the keyboard, never touching the next number. 12 years had passed, 12 long, hard, but so necessary years, since I last heard this voice, since I spoke to any of them at all, to my mother, my father, or, most painfully, to my younger sister Lily. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! For 12 years, I had been building my new life step by step, without looking back, without allowing myself even a hint of memories. A successful, self-sufficient life that I had built far from their eternally toxic favoritism, which had grown into me since childhood, like mold into a damp wall. I glanced quickly at the office door. It was closed, and I felt a strange gratitude for this simple fact. A closed door, like a symbol of my new, protected reality. "What do you want?" I asked, and although my voice sounded harsher than I intended, I immediately realized that perhaps this was exactly how I wanted it: prickly, cold, repulsive. My free hand clenched into a fist on the table, my nails dug into my palm, and I took a deep breath when I heard on the phone. "Your father, he is very ill, Harper. The doctors say he doesn't have much time left." Her voice wavered, just a little, but I noticed it because I remembered how her real emotion sounded, and this was not the case. "We want you to come home to make peace, to say goodbye." I sat staring into space, at the expensive, stark, soulless piece of modern art that hung on the wall of my office, bought last year simply because I could afford it, not because it meant anything. There was a silence between us, taut as an elastic band about to snap from the strain, and only outside the window did life go on. People going about their business, cars scurrying back and forth, the day spinning like a clock hand, and in my office time stood still, holding its breath. "I'll think about it," I said finally, trying to keep my voice even, and hung up without giving her time to respond. Of course, she could have tried to make me feel guilty, to drag me into the old game I always lost at, to manipulate, to beg, or just blackmail me with feelings, like she used to, but I didn't give her that chance. I sat motionless for a long time, feeling my coffee growing cold. It stood next to me, forgotten, like a witness to the morning that had gone completely wrong. And then they came, the memories, the ones I had buried inside myself for years, like old letters in a drawer, hoping they would never surface. But they came, like a damn invasion, like a storm out of the blue, and I found myself back there, in the past, in childhood, in those days when I learned to be strong, because no one left me any other choice. I remembered every slight, every little betrayal, every moment when they chose Lily over me, and how I had to be responsible, grown up, even when I wanted someone to hug me and tell me that I was important, too. I had always been independent. From the moment Lily was born just 2 years after me, it was clear right away who was the sun and who was the orbit in this family. There was no doubt who was the favorite. Every birthday, every Christmas, even the most ordinary days, everyone followed the same script. Lily got new toys, bright, beautiful clothes, a big portion of dessert. I got practical gifts, long conversations about the importance of being a role model for my little sister, especially if she was sensitive, as Mom liked to say. When Lily wanted my new crayons in 3rd grade, Mom made me give them to her, saying, "You know how sensitive she is," and Lily stood behind her, smirking, as if she knew she would get her way, when she threw my favorite book into the pool in a fit of hysterics, the same one my favorite teacher had given me, the one I spent hours reading under the blanket with a flashlight. Dad just shrugged and muttered, "Well, things happen, accidents," and bought Lily an ice cream so she wouldn't cry. No one bought me a new book, and when Lily started getting better grades, they threw a party. "Look how smart our girl is," Mom exclaimed when Lily brought home another A or recited a poem in front of guests, and everyone applauded and was touched. Crow happily yapped at her feet, and I sat in the corner, hugging my knees, with my notebooks, neat notes, and an invariable feeling that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough to be smart in their eyes. My smooth, predictable days, when I came home with excellent grades, no one really cared, they just nodded, throwing something over their shoulder like, "Well, we expect this from you, Harper." This phrase crashed into me like a hammer. "You are older, you must set an example," as if I were not a person, but some kind of living moral standard that has no right to weakness, to envy, to resentment. I learned one simple but harsh truth early on: if I wanted something, the only way I could get it was by myself. At 16, I got a job after school. Joe's was my first real step into a reality where everything depended on me. The manager, Sarah, strict but fair, with a perpetually dusty notebook and a voice that held more warmth than any of my mother's approval, quickly became what my mother never became, a mentor, a woman who believed in me. She taught me how to handle money, how to say no when necessary, how to stand my ground and not apologize for it. I saved every tip, imagining the day I would leave, the house, the city, their world where I was always the odd one out. But it was that incident with the phone, seemingly small and mundane, that opened my eyes to how deeply rooted this infection of favoritism had taken root in our family. I had saved for months, even denying myself ice cream in the heat, to buy myself a simple smartphone, not anything expensive, just a basic $100 model, bought almost entirely with tips. The day I brought it home beaming, hoping for just a moment to feel proud of myself, Lily threw a fit, as always, without warning, in full swing. "But I want one too," she wailed, her eyes filling with tears, her hands reaching for my phone, grabbing it as if it were her rightful trophy. "Harper, give it to me. You're so selfish," she screamed, sobbing. "No," I said firmly, stepping back, clutching the phone with both hands. "I bought it with my own money, I worked for it. You can save up for one, too, you can get a job like me." And of course, it was all predictable, like a play we had been performing for years. "Mom! Dad!" Lily screamed, her face flushed, her shrieks filling the air, and they came running. Of course they came running. Mom flew out of the kitchen, Dad hurried out of the study. They always came running when Lily called. As if on cue, their faces were full of worry, but not because of me, not because of the conflict, but because of the suffering of their precious little miracle. "Harper," Dad said, his voice stern, his face frozen in disappointment, and I felt it crashing down on me, just like those hundreds of times before. "Why are you so selfish? Your sister just wants to look at your phone." "Because it's mine," I screamed, and my voice was shaking, not from fear, but from anger, from that despair boiling inside that I had hidden for so long. "I worked for this, I earned every dollar. You have to love your sister," Mom said, her voice colder than usual. "How can you be so cruel? We raised you better than this." And in that moment, I looked at them, really looked at them, not through them, not avoiding their gaze, not hiding my emotions, and something snapped inside me, something that no longer wanted to submit, to put up with, to explain. This wasn't normal, this wasn't fair, this wasn't love, this was something else, something much uglier and more twisted, and I wanted no part of it anymore. "I love her," I said quietly, almost a whisper, "but that doesn't mean I have to give her everything I have." I went to my room and closed the door, the click of the lock louder than any scream. I ignored their knocks, their wails, Lily's fake sobs that I knew would soon escalate into more demands for something new, then into accusations. That night, choking on the stifling air of resentment and determination, I sat down at my computer and opened a new document. At the very top, I wrote, "College application." I remember the day my acceptance letter arrived as if it were yesterday. I was 18, fresh out of high school, my fingers shaking as I ripped open the envelope that held the University of Arizona logo and the investment management program. Sarah was there, standing behind the counter of the cafe, wiping her cup, and when I whispered, "I passed," and then louder, "I passed," she ran out from behind the counter and hugged me tightly, as if I were her daughter, and there was more pride in her eyes than I had ever seen in my own mother's. "I never doubted you," she said. The second letter informed me that I had been approved for a partial scholarship, much more than I had hoped for. I still needed to come up with about $30,000 to cover the rest of my expenses, but I wasn't worried, because I knew that this was what Grandpa had left for. Before he died, he had made it clear that the funds were for the education of both granddaughters. I was there when he said it, directly, firmly, with that special gleam in his eyes that I remember even now. Both girls need to get an education, that's what this money is for. I drove home that day full of hope, believing so much that maybe now, at this very moment, something would finally change, that maybe for the first time in a long time they would look at me and see not just a convenient executor of someone else's expectations, not someone who always got it right, not someone who should, but me, Harper, a person, a daughter, a girl who had achieved something on her own. I imagined them being surprised, my mom smiling for real, my dad patting me on the shoulder, maybe even hugging me. I dreamed of showing them the letter, of them proudly saying, "We knew you could do it," but the reality, as often happens, was much quieter, colder, and more painful. I found them in the living room, Lily sprawled on the couch, her head lazily glued to her phone, typing something in a messenger, while Mom and Dad, sprawled in armchairs, were watching another evening series, their faces relaxed, detached, as if nothing important was happening in this world. "I got accepted," I said, unable to contain the delight in my voice, holding up the letter as if it were an Olympic torch. "Investment management program, Arizona, they're even giving me a partial scholarship." Mom turned off the TV, and this movement was the most attentive in our entire conversation. Dad shifted in his chair, casting a quick glance at me. Lily didn't even tear herself away from the screen. "That's sweet, dear," Mom said, and there was something in her voice that made everything inside me clench. I knew that tone. The tone implied that my joy was an inconvenience, that my success was an obstacle to be worked around. "But Arizona is so far away," she continued, "and the program." "That's exactly what I want," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was starting to shake inside. "And with the money Grandpa left me, for the rest of my education." "We don't have that money anymore," Dad interrupted, clearing his throat. The world froze, everything around us shook, as if the ground beneath our feet had cracked. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "Grandpa left that money specifically for our education." I was there, I heard him say it. "We had to make a choice," Mom said, not looking up, smoothing her skirt as if that was more important than what was happening. "Investment opportunities came up." "What about Lily's college fund?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. I saw it on their faces, in my mother's lowered eyelashes, in my father's gaze, which stubbornly avoided mine. Dad laughed, and there was something terrifying in his laugh, indifferent, like the flick of a switch. "Don't worry about your sister's education, we'll provide for it." "So you spent my share," I said, my voice growing louder, more intense, anger pounding in my temples. "You spent the money Grandpa left me, and you still lie." "Don't be dramatic," Mom snapped, "you've always been smart, you'll find a way." I looked at them, really, and suddenly it all became sickeningly clear. The expensive jewelry, Mom's shiny earrings, the new golf clubs in the corner, Lily's designer clothes, her latest iPhone, all of it had been bought with my money, with something that was meant for my future. "Are you telling me," I said slowly, feeling each word cut through the air, "that you spent my grandfather's money, and went off to study for yourself?" "Watch your tone," my father warned, his voice hard as an icy stone. "No," I screamed, my voice breaking like a thunderclap in the quiet room. "I won't watch my tone. It's wrong, it's so wrong. Grandfather wanted that money for both of us." "Get out," my mother snapped, her voice suddenly cold as a knife. "Just get out until you learn to speak to us with respect." I stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that the glass in the hallway rattled, and drove to a cafe because I didn't know where else to go. Tears blurred my vision, but I worked my shift as usual, pouring coffee, clearing tables, gritting my teeth to keep from crying in front of people. A few days later, things got even worse. It was my usual morning shift. I did everything automatically, as if on autopilot, making coffee, serving food, smiling at customers, as if nothing had happened. Sarah, of course, noticed that something was wrong. Her eyes said so, but she, as always, did not insist. That's why I loved her so much, for respecting my boundaries, my silence. When I got home that day, I put the key in the lock and it didn't turn. I froze. I tried again and again, but nothing. Then I looked down and saw them, my suitcases, those old, dusty ones from the basement, standing by the door, filled with my clothes. Some things were neatly folded, others were simply shoved inside, as if someone was in a hurry, as if someone wanted to get rid of me quickly, without a trace. "Mom!" I screamed, knocking. "Dad? You are no longer welcome here." I heard my mother's voice from behind the door, distant, devoid of even a shadow of regret. "We will not tolerate such disrespect in this house." "Are you serious?" I could not believe my ears. "You are throwing me out because I was upset that you stole my money for college?" "Don't be so dramatic," came the answer. "You are already 18, you are already an adult, it's time to learn to figure things out on your own." I stood and looked at the suitcases, trying not to cry. Cars drove past on our street. Neighbors who had known me my whole life behaved as if nothing had happened, as if my parents hadn't just thrown me out of their own lives. "What about Lily?" I asked, my voice shaking, unable to contain my hurt. "Would you ever do that to her?" There was no answer. Just silence. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, not knowing where else to turn, and called Aunt Rachel, my mother's sister, the woman who had always seemed different to me, a living reminder that not everything in this family was built on judgment and conditional love. She answered on the second ring, and her voice immediately sounded alarmed. "Harper? What's wrong? You seem upset." I couldn't help myself. The words came out of me like a torrent, like a dam being washed away by despair and pain, and between sobs I told her everything, about going to college, about Grandpa's money disappearing, about the suitcases by the door, about the lock that would no longer let me in the house. She didn't interrupt, but listened silently, and only then, in a firm, almost commanding voice, she said, "Your Uncle Mike and I are coming to get you, right now." 45 minutes later, their silver car pulled up to the curb in front of the house, and when I saw Uncle Mike getting out to load my suitcases into the trunk, and Aunt Rachel running up to me and wrapping her arms around me, tight, warm, real, I felt like someone was actually seeing me for the first time that terrible day. "I'm so sorry, honey," she whispered, hiding my face in her shoulder. "It was wrong, it was so wrong." That night, I was sitting on the edge of the bed in their cozy guest room, wrapped in a soft patchwork blanket, when the two of them walked in, Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike, holding an envelope. "We want to help with your tuition," Aunt Rachel said, handing me a check. "It's not all we have, but it's what we can do." I burst into tears, unable to contain my gratitude and embarrassment, and through my tears I murmured, "I'll pay you back. I promise. Every penny." "We know you'll do it," Uncle Mike said, putting his hand on my shoulder, "because, unlike some people, we know exactly who you are and what you're capable of." I looked at the check, $30,000, enough to cover everything the scholarship lacked, enough to give me a chance, enough to change my life. The next 12 years passed like a dream I, Harper T., had built with my own hands, no favors, no handouts, reminding myself at every step why I was going through it. College was no walk in the park. It was challenging, but also incredibly exciting. I threw myself into my studies like a lifeline, working part-time in the university finance department to pay for my living expenses. Every semester, my name was on the dean's list. Every summer, I landed prestigious internships, first at small firms, then at regional offices of large companies. Every month, I put money aside, giving back to Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike what they had invested in me, with love and faith. For those 4 years, my phone never rang with my parents' numbers, no letters, no texts, not even a dry birthday greeting. Sometimes I found myself wondering where they were, what their life was like, remembering Lily and her forever last iPhone. But then I remembered the suitcases by the door, and the lock that kept me from coming home, and I brought myself back to the future, to my future. My first job offer came 2 months before graduation. as a junior associate at Goldman Investment Partners. The starting salary seemed like something from another life, more than I could have ever imagined. The day I signed the contract, my hands were shaking, and I called Aunt Rachel. I did it, I told her, my voice shaking with joy and excitement. They want me to start right after graduation. Of course they do, she replied, and I heard the pride in her voice like a song. You're exceptional, Harper, you always have been. I stayed in the same city, where my new job was. I started in a tiny studio apartment, so tiny it barely fit a bed and a desk, but it was mine. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, hit the gym, then be in the office by 7:30. I'd stay late every night, learning from my colleagues, listening, taking notes, absorbing. My boss, Catherine, a stern but fair woman, quickly noticed my dedication and took me under her wing. There's something special about you, she said one night as we worked late preparing a presentation for a major client. You're hungry, but not desperate, driven, but not reckless. We need more of you. 3 years later, I was a senior analyst. 2 years after that, an investment manager. My salary doubled, then tripled. I moved from the studio to a spacious apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering night city, where I now lived, not as a temporary guest, but as a full-fledged participant in this life. I bought my first Mercedes, an elegant, black C-Class, which every time I saw it in the parking lot, made me smile and remember how it all began. I paid off my debt to Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike in full, although they tried in every way to refuse the money, waving their hands and shaking their heads with sincere, almost parental stubbornness, as if my happiness alone was already a reward for them. We didn't help you so that you should pay us back. Aunt Rachel was indignant, hugging me tightly when I handed them the envelope. I looked into her eyes and, barely restraining the trembling in my voice, answered, I know that you helped me because you love me. But I'm giving you back this money because I love you too and because I keep my promises. We all fell silent, and in that silence there was more tenderness than 1,000 words, more love than I had ever received from those who called themselves my blood family. After that, I allowed myself to breathe a little for the first time in many years and began to live the life I had once only dreamed of. I traveled the world, inhaled the morning fog in Paris, caught the reflections of neon lights on the windows of Tokyo at night, basked in the soft sand in Sydney, posted photos of sunsets in Santorini, snow-white peaks in Switzerland, street cafes in Barcelona on social networks. I did not block my family on social networks, not because I wanted to be closer, no, quite the opposite. I wanted that if they ever opened my profile, they would see everything that I have achieved. Let them see, if they want. I was tired of looking back, tired of dragging along the weight of their silence, their indifference, their choices made not in my favor, until that very phone call, until everything collapsed again in my office, 12 years later. A week passed after my mother's call before I found myself behind the wheel, driving down the familiar streets of my hometown, where every hedge, every stop, every turn reminded me of what I had so carefully repressed. Everything seemed smaller, somehow, and I didn't know if it was me growing up or if the city itself had become what it had always been, less important, less dangerous. I pulled up to my parents' house in my Mercedes, took a second to look at my reflection in the rearview mirror, Chanel sunglasses, hair pulled back, breathing evenly, and I was ready, at least on the surface. The house had hardly changed, the same blue shutters, the same wooden porch swing, only now the peeling paint and sagging gutters spoke of neglect, of time that seemed to have stopped here, but was not kind. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She had aged more than I had expected, deep lines around her mouth, ash-gray hair, all of it spoke of years lived with worry, but perhaps not remorse. Harper, she breathed, reaching for my embrace, but I didn't answer. Look at you, you look so successful. Where's Dad? I asked, walking past her into the house, not letting myself get caught up in the theatrics of the moment. The inside smelled the same as before, of the vanilla candles my mother lit every night, and my father's strong coffee, the one he drank most. The living room, she said, hurrying forward, as if she wanted to smooth something over, to anticipate, to turn back time. Hans having a good day. I wasn't ready. No part of me was ready for the way my father looked, the man who had once seemed to me the embodiment of sternness, strength, and control now sat in an old chair, hunched over, thin, almost translucent, as if the life were draining from him with every breath. But when he saw me, his eyes lit up, not a flash, no, more a warm, flickering light, and for a moment I saw the same man who had once held me on his shoulders. "Harper," he said. And his voice was weaker than I remembered, but there was still that note of authority in it that had once defined the rhythm of the entire house. "You're here." "I'm here," I said, sitting down in the chair opposite him. "You look unwell." He chuckled, but the laughter quickly turned into a long, drawn-out cough. "Always the straightforward type, huh?" he said hoarsely. "It's cancer. The doctors say a few months, maybe less." Mom hovered around, her hands jingling as if she didn't know what to do with them. "I got your old room ready for you," she said quickly. "It's just like you left it." I almost laughed, short and bitter, as if I'd left it, they'd made sure it wasn't there, 12 years ago. "Where's Lily?" I asked, noticing her absence, her empty aura that was always louder than her presence. "Oh, she's gone out with some friends," Mom answered quickly, "but she'll be back for dinner. She's so happy to see you." I doubted it, but I nodded anyway. We chatted for a while, awkwardly, like old acquaintances forced to sit at the same table. They asked about my job, my apartment, my car, and I answered briefly, politely, watching them exchange glances, thinking I didn't notice. That evening, Lily finally showed up, all in designer clothes, looking crisp and new. She'd gained weight, but her face still had that haughty softness, that eternal certainty that the world was her birthright. "Harper," she squealed. As if we were best friends who'd been separated for only a few days. "Oh my God, is that a Cartier watch? It's gorgeous." Dinner was weird. Mom set the table like she was in an old commercial. Meat, mashed potatoes, green beans, everything I loved when I was a kid, as if food could glue together 12 years of silence, betrayal, hurt. Dad barely ate, just shoveling food around his plate. Lily chatted away, about friends, parties, dreams of starting a lifestyle blog, and then Dad looked up and said, "We need to talk about something important." Mom tensed. I saw Lily's eyes darken, and between them, something passed, something old, sticky, disturbing. Something clicked in my head the moment my dad started talking, pressing his lips together and pulling a glass of water towards himself with slightly trembling hands. It wasn't just a farewell to a dying man, not just a heavy, sad episode in a family drama that I had long ago closed in my mind. It was something else, something deeper. As if a door had suddenly opened into an old room where hushed intentions were still stored. "What is it?" I asked, although I already knew intuitively that this would not be a good request. Dad slowly leaned forward, and his face acquired the seriousness that I remembered from childhood, the same one with which he once scolded me for breaking a vase, not caring who really broke it. "I need you to promise me something," he said, "a dying wish, if you don't mind." I waited, everything inside me was already beginning to clench. My hand gripped the glass of water so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "After I'm gone," he took a breath, "I need to know that Lily will be taken care of, that she'll be able to continue her life, and you, well, you can guarantee that." The room was so silent, so thick that I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the monotonous hum of the refrigerator, and, loudest of all, my own heartbeat, heavy as a fist being thrown into my chest. "You want me to do what you're asking?" My voice was dangerously quiet, almost a whisper. "To take care of my grown sister?" My mother intervened, her tone cautious, almost ingratiating. "To help her, well, financially, you're doing well, Harper, you have more than enough." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraped across the wooden floor with an unpleasant scrape. "Let me get this straight," I said, looking them both in the eye. "You called me here after 12 years of silence to ask me to financially support my fully capable, adult sister?" "Harper, please sit down," Mom pleaded, coming closer. "You're making everything more dramatic than it needs to be." I laughed, short and harsh, and there was not an ounce of humor in it. "Kicked me out of this house, left my suitcases on the doorstep. Spent my college money Grandpa specifically left for my education, and now you expect me to support Lily?" "It's not fair," Lily said, her voice whiny, the same intonation she always used to get her way. "You have so much money and you won't share it. You've always been selfish." I turned and looked at her carefully. I looked at her designer dress, her expensive jewelry, her perfectly manicured nails. All of it was evidence of someone's care, but certainly not of her own independence. "All of this was paid for by our parents," I said slowly. "Even now, when you're 28, what exactly have you been doing for the last 12 years, Lily?" She flushed, I was finding myself, she blurted out defensively, not all of us want to be corporate slaves. No, you were just left to be supported by mom and dad. I shook my head. And now that dad is sick, you're worried about losing your free life pass, aren't you? Don't talk to your sister like that. Mom snapped, she's sensitive. She needs to grow up. I screamed, unable to contain myself. She needs to learn to provide for herself, stop depending on everyone around her to pay for her lifestyle. Suddenly, her father's fist thudded down on the table, not as hard as it once had, but loud enough to bring everyone's attention back. Enough. His voice was weaker, but still brooked no argument. I'm dying, Harper. My last wish is to know that my youngest daughter will be taken care of. I looked at him. What about your oldest daughter? I asked quietly, almost in a whisper. Have you ever wanted to take care of me? The silence that followed was deafening. The words that weren't said hung in the air, heavier than the ones that were. I slowly picked up my purse from the back of my chair, stood up, and said in an even voice, I'm leaving, this was a mistake. Harper, please. Mom rushed after me as I headed for the door. Think about what you're doing. Think about your father's last wish. I turned around. I'll help pay for Dad's medical bills if that's what he really needs, I said, but I won't support Lily. That's my last answer. I walked out of the house without looking back, not listening to my mother's sobs or Lily's dramatic wails. I walked to my car, feeling my strength return with every step. I drove in silence until I stopped a few blocks away and pulled out my phone to dial Aunt Rachel. They want me to support Lily, I said when she answered. Can you believe it? Oh, Harper, she sighed, and there was so much weariness in her voice. I was afraid it might be something like this. Your sister, she's never worked a day in her life, and your parents have covered for everything she's done for so long. The next 2 days were an endless stream of angry calls, texts, and broken voicemails. My mother wrote reproachfully, accusing me of selfishness, of heartlessness. You're killing your father with your indifference. I read in the messages. Lily, in turn, wrote in the same style as always, only now with resentment. You've always been jealous of me, you're just trying to punish me. I saved all the messages, not because I wanted to reread them or hold a grudge, but because something inside me told me I might need them later, as proof, as a reminder, as a shield if someone ever tried to pin a guilt I no longer intended to bear on me. The next time Mom called, I put my phone on record before I answered, already knowing where the conversation would go. Harper, she began without preamble, without pause, her voice full of reproach and demand. How can you be so cold and selfish? Your sister needs you. I'm ready to help with Daddy, I answered calmly, but Lily is an adult, she needs to learn to provide for herself. There was a short pause, and then Mom spat out, you're not worth your sister's little finger, you've always been a burden to Mommy, we shouldn't have called you. I hung up without another word and sat in my room, in silence, looking at the cityscape outside the window as if it were something distant and neutral that didn't require any emotion from me. Then I opened my laptop, went to my mother's social media page, just to check, and saw a long post written in her style. Verbose, deliberately tragic, with a photo of her holding her father's hand and a caption about a heartless daughter who refused to help her dying father. The comments multiplied, relatives, family friends, old neighbors, all expressing their disappointment in me, writing about ingratitude, selfishness, immorality. Something inside me broke, not because I didn't expect the blow, but because after 12 years of silence, this is how they decided to come back into my life, I wrote. My own post, not with complaints, but with facts. I attached screenshots of the messages, fragments of the recorded conversation. I told her everything, about my childhood, about the systematic favoritism, about the money that was meant for me but was spent on Lily, about how I was kicked out, how my suitcases were standing by the door, how they didn't invite me, didn't write, didn't congratulate me. I ended up saying that they didn't want to make peace, as my mother wrote, they wanted me to financially support my able-bodied sister because she didn't know how to live independently. The reaction was immediate, comments started pouring in response to her post, but now not in my direction, in theirs. People were shocked, not by me, but by what was hidden under this screen of family pretense. Family members I hadn't spoken to for years started writing to me personally, some shared stories, some apologized for their silence, some admitted that they had noticed it too but were afraid to speak out. Mom tried to justify herself in the comments. But every explanation only dug her deeper into the hole. Even her most devoted friends couldn't justify one adult daughter having to support another without the slightest awareness or gratitude. 6 months passed. Aunt Rachel called in a quiet, controlled voice and said Dad had died. Mom hadn't invited me to the funeral. It was her last, petty act of revenge. I didn't mind. I sent a bouquet of white lilies and eucalyptus with a card that said one word: "Goodbye, Dad." That was 3 months ago. Through Aunt Rachel, I learned that Mom was struggling to maintain her normal lifestyle, living off what was left of Dad's checks. Lily was making a scene because she could no longer afford the monthly shopping trips and fancy dinners. Sometimes I find myself wondering, have they learned anything from all this? Have they even thought about it for a minute? And then I realize, it doesn't matter, it's not my lesson. Last week, I got another call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. It was Lily. Her voice was soft, almost contrite. "Harper, it's me. I just wanted to know, maybe you've changed your mind. I'm still on my feet, and any help." I hit delete without listening to the end. Now I'm sitting in my office, looking out at the space I built for myself, the tall windows, the bookcases, the warm light of the lamp, the quiet clink of a teaspoon against a ceramic cup, and I feel a strange lightness in my chest. I'm at peace with my decisions. I regret that I never got to have a real conversation with my father, naked, human, but I don't regret staying true to myself. Many would call me cold, cruel, merciless, but over the years, I've learned that standing up for yourself, setting boundaries, saying no when you're being used, that's not cruelty, that's maturity, that's self-love. I look at the picture on the table, the three of us, me, Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike, at my last birthday party, laughing, hugging, smiling like a real family. They are my real family, the ones who didn't set conditions, didn't demand proof, didn't buy off their love. Blood may be thicker than water, as they say, but I know one thing: love is thicker than blood. True love is not measured by expectations, can't be bought, and doesn't require a price. My phone vibrates, a text from Aunt Rachel. "Are you coming to Sunday dinner? Mike is having his special stew." I smile without thinking. Yes, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Some bridges are burned for a reason, others only get stronger with time. I've learned to distinguish between the two.